Great. Good morning, everyone. We're slowly going to start admitting people into our webinar here today. So we'll give folks a moment to do that. And yeah, hope everyone's having a great morning. We have an excellent webinar planned for everyone today, which will be talking about statistics and making great business decisions. So again, welcome everyone. We'll get started here shortly. Perfect. Again, welcome everyone to today's webinar. And thank you so much for joining us today for our session. And as we get going here, I just want to do a quick icebreaker for those in attendance. And just was wondering, how do you currently use how do you use data in your business to make business decisions? Feel free to type that in the chat as we get going here. So I do want to do our land acknowledgement. So Business Link acknowledges and respects that we are on traditional land, meeting grounds, territories, gathering places, and traveling routes of Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, and the home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the lands of those who have come before us, reside here now, and in the future. So again, welcoming everyone today to our webinar here at Business Link on leveraging statistics for small business decisions. And in this session today, you'll be learning about how to leverage those statistics through Statistics Canada, using data for market research, industry trends, competitor insights, and financial planning. So a few housekeeping things as we get started here. So there is a Q&A feature in the room here. Feel free to use that to ask any questions that you might have. We also have a chat box for more informal questions that you might have. Feel free to type there too, and we can hopefully get to as many questions as we can through today's session. And today's webinar will be sent via email, hopefully in the next 24 hours of a recording link. And the session will also be available on our YouTube page in the next few days here. So again, welcome everyone to today's session on leveraging statistics for small business decisions. And with me today, I have Darren Lezubski. Darren is a consulting analyst and workshop instructor with the Statistical Information Services, SIS, at Statistics Canada, serving the Western and Northern region. A first-generation Canadian, Darren has been with Statistics Canada for nearly a decade, helping businesses and organizations navigate and utilize statistical data effectively. And so I'll maybe pass things over to Darren, and we can get started with today's presentation. And Darren will be sharing his screen, and we'll learn all about the wonders of statistics. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, David. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. As David has said, I'm going to be giving you a very quick introduction to data that's available from Statistics Canada that we hope will be useful for a whole host of different things. Everyone is likely coming to this session with different information needs. And so I'm going to try and give you a quick introduction to some of the data sets that we think might be very useful and helpful. And I'll just share my screen and see if we can get going. So if everyone, I'll just put this in presenter mode. If everyone is able to see my screen, correct?
Yes.
You'll notice there's a slight distinction, slight difference in the title of the session, but the theme is essentially the same. How do you use business information to help you make good decisions? And one of the things I'll always remind you is that it's so crucially important that we we use information to help us sort of put things into measurable perspective, to sort of quantify things. But statistics are not the only tool that are available to you and that you use in your decision-making process. You can use intuition. You can use rational thinking coupled with intuition to help make you sort of make those important decisions. But I'm going to just sort of talk a little bit about sort of what we're going to try and cover today. And we're going to talk a little bit about, as David has said, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use statistics to help identify potential markets. So the first couple of data sources I'm actually going to be introducing you to won't actually be business specific, but they'll be data sources that you can use to build a benchmark or a foundation that you can add additional information to have a better understanding of who might your market be, who might be your audience, things of that nature. We'll talk a little bit about some of the data that's available to get a sense of, what are Canadians spending their disposable income on? There are a couple of data sources that allow us to measure and assess that. I'm going to introduce you to some concepts here at Statistics Canada, and in terms of how industry and work are classified. And the reason we're going to do that is because much of the data that is reported is going to be reported in particular ways. So it's really useful to be familiar with just how the information is reported in order to help you sort of gain the most from that data that's available. And then if I have time, I will try and also provide a little bit of a navigation of Statistics Canada's website. I'll make sure that we cover everything here, but it's really helpful. And oftentimes we have people say to us, I went to the Statistics Canada website, I was a little overwhelmed. And so I've heard that enough to say, well, I want to try and distill that mystique that's associated with trying to find your way around Statistics Canada's website. So the information and the sources I'm going to show you today, I'll try and, if I have time, I'll give you a quick sort of introduction of where you might be able to find them on our website. And as David was asking, I think it was David was asking, what are you hoping to do with the information? I always want you to think about, what are you hoping to get from the session? So I will try and leave some time at the end for questions. But I believe you can also post questions in the chat during the session. And if there's anything really burning, or if there's anything that maybe you would like me to revisit or sort of discuss in a different way, so that you sort of get a fuller understanding of it, feel free to let me know, and I'm always happy to revisit. I approach these from the philosophy that I want you to get as much as you can. And one of the reasons that, I'm doing this, and my colleague Laszlo is here as well, sitting in, but, I'll just give you a little background about Statistics Canada. And we are the National Statistical Agency, and our job, as defined by the Statistics Act, is to collect, compile, and disseminate information about Canadians, about the economy, resources, our cultural. And so one of the reasons I'm always happy to do these sessions is because it gives me an opportunity to remind you that this is your data. So the information I'm showing you is your data. I want you to use that data to the fullest extent possible. Our agency does the work of collecting it and disseminating it, but it's up to Canadians to make full and maximum use of the information that's available. So, the other consideration is, as the National Statistical Agency, our job is to make sure we're providing Canadians with good, reliable information. And I think you can all appreciate that in this day and age, it's becoming more and more difficult to distinguish good from bad data. So being familiar with reliable sources that you can go to, like Statistics Canada, is really crucial. So yes, we're tasked with collecting data, but we're also tasked as the National Statistical Agency with building statistical capacity and data literacy skills. And data literacy skills are just those things you should be thinking about, questions you should be asking when you're encountering data, and questions you should be asking about, what type of data is available. So that's a quick introduction to our role as the National Statistical Agency. I'm not going to spend much more, but if you do have additional questions about our work and how we might be able to help you, please feel free to reach out. We have an InfoStats email address that you can reach out to and send us emails. I don't know where everyone is. I just realized that I always like to start these with the land acknowledgement, and in the spirit of reconciliation with our First Nations and Métis and Inuit brothers and sisters, I always like to let people know I'm joining you from Winnipeg, the Treaty 1 territory. But I don't know where others are joining from. So feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to help with questions that you might have. So let's talk a little bit about how we might actually be using this information. And as I said, one of the things that I have found as I've offered this session and taught this session to different audiences is recognizing that people in the audience are coming from different perspectives. People might be developing a business plan. People might be trying to think about a particular business opportunity that they want to explore, and they want to see, what are some of the groundwork that we should know about, how many similar businesses might already exist. You might be trying to get a handle on, just what people are spending their money on, who we're trading with. I'll talk very briefly about the different types of data for retail trade and international trade. And depending on your focus, you might be looking at exporting goods and services from Canada. You might be looking at importing goods and services from Canada. But all of those sort of different aspects, you might be trying to think about, how do I staff my business? What type of wages might be expected? All of those are some of the considerations that I think people who take these sessions tend to sort of have. So it's not just one particular audience or one particular question. There's a whole host of questions that participants usually have. So in this case, we'll introduce you to things like what type of products are in demand, what type of industries, how many industries there are, or how many businesses there are in particular industries. And I'll show you a couple of data sets that will allow you to measure that. We could talk about, from a business plan perspective, there's some really good sources. One of them is not Statistics Canada source. It's Industry and Development Canada, federal government department, but it's based on Statistics Canada data. And it just provides an example of what are the type of typical expenses that businesses in particular industries encounter or are likely to encounter. And again, I hope you can appreciate that sometimes if you're not sure what type of information is out there, even having some information is better than none. So that's sort of the objective of introducing you to the different types of data sources. And then I'll introduce you to some data sources that help provide some context in terms of challenges that businesses are encountering or businesses are expecting throughout the country.
Darren,
So, yes,
yeah.
please. You got a question, David? Please.
Yeah, I think it might be useful. I know some folks are chiming in where they're joining us from, but it might be helpful for you to maybe know what types of businesses people are getting going. That could be useful for some of the data you might be presenting. So yeah, folks want to type in the chat. Please do let us know. Maybe you currently have a business or whatever business you're looking to start, and we can maybe summarize those for Darren.
Sure. And as I said, I will introduce you to the NAICS, so the North American Industrial Classification System. And one of the questions people often ask us is, well, which NAICS code does my business activity fall under? And the reason we introduce you to the NAICS is because much of the data that is reported by NAICS code. So you'll see the logic of what I'm covering. It's not all specific to business per se, but it's important to know. It's like having a basic foundation, and knowing those NAICS codes and where your business might fall. And if I have time, I'll definitely take you to the StatsCan website. I'll walk you through how you can search the NAICS codes and get an understanding of, because they can be quite varied in terms of the types of businesses that are located in different NAICS codes. So I would love to hear the sort of different activities that people are doing, and maybe we direct them to the particular NAICS codes. So perfect, thank you. So as I said, there are several things we can do with this type of data. We can think about, I'll introduce you to the census of population, and use that as a springboard to get a sense of, what type of market I might have, how big is my population, how potentially big is my population. If I'm looking at specific segments of the population, like a particular age group, the census is going to provide some really detailed data. And I'll talk specifically about the characteristics of the census, but some of you might be thinking about a business perspective or a business opportunity that's directed to a particular ethnic or cultural community. The census is going to give us some indication of how large those communities are. If you're looking at particular, high-end market, the census is going to give us some detailed information on household and individual and employment income. So you can look to see which neighborhoods have higher than average incomes. So I'll introduce you to that, and it's just part of developing your target demographic. Market composition. It's really helpful to know how many competitors might you have. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about just recognizing the current economic trends, labor market information. We'll talk about identifying spending patterns and things of that nature, industrial trends, which industries are growing, which industries are declining, which may be suffering more than others. You can use the data to get a sense of which industries might be booming, thriving, and things of that nature. And then financial performance. That's one of the other things we'll talk about. So that's basically the premise of what we're trying to sort of get you to think about, how you could use statistical information to help make a stronger case for what you're trying to present and to better understand all those different components. So, as I said, the first couple of sources is not going to be specific to business data, but it sets the tone in terms of establishing a foundation. And the first data set we'll talk about is the census of population. And again, as the National Statistical Agency, the census is one of, if not the most important activity that we conduct. The census is conducted every 5 years, and a census, by its definition, is a complete enumeration of the entire population at a point in time. And one of the reasons we highlight the census and sort of drive home the uniqueness of it is because many of the other data sources I'll be showing you a little bit later are going to be information derived from sample surveys or administrative data. And I won't turn this into a research methods class, I promise. The stats can guys going to get into statistics, but just the important consideration in that, if you have a census, you conduct a census, you're able to get very detailed information about Canadians at very small levels of geography. So neighborhoods, for example. Whereas with sample surveys, we're collecting information, as the name implies, from a sample, not the whole population. And so we can still get reliable information because we use randomness to our advantage. But we don't necessarily get the same level of detail. So sample surveys can be more timely. They can be monthly or every 2 months or twice a year, as opposed to a census, which is every 5 years. But the census gives you the level of detail. So as I said, if you wanted to look at particular language, let's say you were targeting or thinking about marketing to a particular language or population who spoke a particular language, the census is going to give you that type of detail. If you want to focus at a particular ethnic or cultural group, the census will allow you to identify pockets or concentrations of different ethno-cultural groups. It'll help you understand the size. It'll even help you understand the age. So if you wanted to focus on seniors, let's say you were developing a product or a business or a service that was directed to seniors, the census gives an indication of how many seniors there are now, how many there's likely to be in the next 5 or 10 years, by using age structure as an indication of how the population is going to shift over time. Or if you wanted to market to teens or whomever your target audience might be, the census is going to allow you to look at detailed information for those groups. So it's really crucial that you be familiar with the census and that you use it as a means to sort of, as I said, sometimes set a benchmark, even just knowing what's my population in my community and how has it changed over time. Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Is it booming? Is it declining? Those are really important things to be familiar with. So as I said, we won't spend a lot of time on each of these. I'm going to use this session as a springboard to introduce you to the data sets that are available. And I'm hoping and encouraging you to, on your own, and to explore the data sets further. I'll try and give you a little bit of a crash course during the web navigation, but we're really just trying to make sure that you're familiar with. I used to teach research methods at the University of Manitoba before I joined Statistics Canada. And I would always tell my students, just knowing what type of data is available is half the battle. Then once you know what data is available and what's not, then you can use that data to try to understand it to its fullest extent. So the census is one of the first data sources we want you to be familiar with. There are, as I said, there's a host of variables, what we call variables or characteristics that are available from the census. This is just an example of one of them. Household income. You could look to see how household income has changed in different cities between 2021 and 2016. You can get a handle on a whole host of other characteristics, but this is just an example of what you can do with the census. But you can even go down to what are called census tracts or neighborhoods and look to see if there's, if I'm developing a coffee shop, I want to know the demographics, the income, and the characteristics of maybe 3 or 4 blocks within the location of my proposed site. The census will allow you to look at some of that data. So that's the census. One of the other data sources we're going to talk about here, introduce you to, that's not technically a business survey, is a survey that's conducted every 2 years, and it's called the Survey of Household Spending, or SHS, Survey of Household Spending. And this is a valuable survey from a business perspective because it provides data on what Canadians are spending their disposable income on. So again, think about stepping back and trying to get a sense of, I'm developing an auto repair shop. What are Canadians typically spending on auto repairs, in a typical year? And it might be helpful to have a benchmark of what the typical expenditure is. A survey of household spending will allow you to look at that at the provincial level. So it doesn't allow for detailed analysis, but it at least provides a starting point. And as I said, sometimes some data is better than no data. So this is a survey, as I said, it's conducted every 2 years. Here's just a sort of an infographic example of how Canadians, the 2023 survey household spending will be released, I believe, sometime in May, but I'm not 100% certain. So that may not be, but it should be released sometime soon. But this is just an indication of, if you want to think about how much are Canadians spending on restaurants? How much are Canadians spending on recreation, books, electronics, entertainment? The survey of household spending allows you to look at that. Purchase of pets, purchase of bicycles. The survey of household spending also allows you to look at the data by whether the respondents are owners, homeowners, or renters. And it also allows you to look at data by what we call income quintiles. And income quintiles are basically, you take the population and you rank, order them, and first 25% of the population, second 25%, third, fourth, fifth, and you'll get an indication of what are high-end households or wealthier households spending as opposed to lower income quintile households. So it's a really valuable source that we want people to be familiar with and to utilize to the fullest extent, because it'll serve as a good starting point to help answer some of your basic questions. Yes, David, do you have a question?
Yeah,
Please.
question. Is the most current data year 2021?
2021. 2023 should be out in a few months.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that's a
great.
survey that's done every 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a really interesting slide about seeing some of those household spendings, right? Like pets and bicycles are up and taxi and air travel is down. So yeah, that's surprising.
No, and sorry to interject, and you always have to keep in mind the impact of the little thing called COVID that might have had an impact on some of this.
Just a little, yeah.
But aside from that, this is helpful data to paint a picture of what, think about it. If you're trying to develop an auto repair business, might be helpful to know what Canadians are typically spending on that types of services, or an electronics business. So this is a helpful data source. And I said, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. And David, you're welcome to chime in. I've got a lot I want to cover today, so I don't want to spend, I'm going over some of this material pretty quickly, but I want to make sure we cover everything. But if there's anything you'd like me to revisit, feel free. So here's, again, this isn't necessarily, well, this is business related, but it's not necessarily a business data source. But we always want to introduce people who take these sessions to what's called the North American Industrial Classification System, or we're federal governments, we love our acronyms, NAICS, the NAICS codes. And the NAICS codes are how we organize businesses in terms of their activities. And it's a hierarchical system. So it starts from a very broad classification, and then it gets more and more detailed as the NAICS code gets larger and more detailed. So we could start with just accommodation and food services. So if someone was thinking about opening a hotel, you could look at, that as your starting NAICS code, and then look to see for more detailed information in terms of how many businesses there are, business expenses and things of that nature. You could look at the NAICS code 72111, hotels except casinos. And so that's the sort of the nature. And as I said, oftentimes when I do these sessions, people will ask me later, how do I know which NAICS code my activity falls in? It's a little bit of exploring. I'll show you the sort of the broad classifications, and then you just try to drill down a little bit and sort of explore. And sometimes you have a unique, sometimes there are some crossovers, but this is the best way we've been able to classify the information. And the reason we introduce you here to this is because some of the data sources I'm going to show you later report the data by NAICS code. Okay, so that's I'm not just purposely torturing you. I'm introducing you to these concepts because they're actually really useful for being able to use other data sources. Okay, so that's the NAICS, the North American Industrial Classification System. So now we'll get into some actually business-related data sources that I think is going to be really useful for people to be familiar with. And the first one is a data set so in Statistics Canada, we have what's called the Business Registry. So any business that has revenues of 30,000 or more, we have information about those businesses, location, number of employees, things of that nature. And every twice a year, in June and December, we release data on Canadian business counts by enterprises and businesses, down to the city level, provincial and city level, and it's by excuse me, it's by NAICS codes. Surprise, surprise. It's by NAICS codes. And so if you wanted to look up how many businesses there are in the particular industry or NAICS code in your community, you can use the business Canadian business counts data source to do that. And it also gives you an indication of how many employees those businesses have. We separate businesses with employees and without employees. There are some sole proprietorship businesses, but there are businesses that have 1 to 4 employees, businesses that have 5 to 19, up to businesses with 500 or more employees. The Canadian business counts will allow you to look at the counts and the number of those type of businesses by industry, by city. So again, a really helpful benchmark to get a sense of where things are at, and even how things are changing over time. So as we say on the slide here, which industries employ most people in your area and things of that. That's the type of information you can glean from this data source. So that's data that's released twice a year, June and December. And we have a whole session just on international trade that we offer. So I don't know which perspective people are having in terms of, are they looking at retail trade and wholesale trade, or are they looking at international trade? But on the Statistics Canada's website, we provide detailed information about retailers and retail trade, so monthly sales by different retail activities and things of that nature. And we also have international data. And so the Canadian International Merchandise Trade web application is a tool that you can use to get a sense of, who are Canada's largest trading partners. And this, of course, is a very topical issue right now. Who are Canada's largest trading partners? What are we selling to others? What is Canada buying from others? This is a tool that will allow you to look at that in terms of the volume, the value, the magnitude of trade. You can look at the top 25 trade partners in Canada. So if you're thinking about an import or an export business, if you're thinking about olive oil business, you can look to see, how much olive oil does Canada ship or sell to others? How much does Canada import? And from whom? And from where? And how much do we import? This data set, the Canadian International Merchandise, will allow you to look at that. And it is classified by what's called harmonization codes or HS codes. So it's basically the way we classify different commodities. So meat imports or dairy imports and things of that nature. So this is a data set. I wish I had more time, but I really want you to be familiar. David, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Do you have any information on
On what? Sorry, I didn't hear you. I think you're muted, David.
I think you might be frozen.
Made in Canada or product of Canada?
Oh,
Do you have any
that's a
data
good
on that?
I don't know off the top of my head if we have the distinctions between that. I know that I've seen some discussions. There's a lot of issues right now about something that's produced in Canada as opposed to made in Canada. I would have to double check on that. I don't know off the top of my head for sure. But Phil, yeah, that's a great question. It's a question that's sort of quite topical. I'll have to double check the data sets. I'm not 100% certain.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, no problem. It's a good question. So, as I said, we've got retail and wholesale trade, but I won't be able to go into too much more on that. But I encourage you to sort of explore those data sets if you have time or if you're interested in looking at it. It's really quite informative to just get a sense of who Canada's top trading partners are and what exactly we're trading with others. So that data set is there and that information is there. So two other data sources that I want to highlight. So one of the things I like to remind people is all those data sources I've talked about already, they're very quantitative. And what I mean by that is they'll give you an indication of the magnitude of how many businesses there are, how many people are employed. But we have a couple of data sources that are more qualitative in nature. And one of them that was developed during COVID was the Canadian Survey of Business Conditions. And it was a survey that was originally started during COVID and people have recognized the value of it. So it has continued. And this is a data set that is released quarterly, so every 4 times a year. And the interesting thing about the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions is it provides information on businesses' expectations. So are businesses expecting to expand over the next 3 months? Are you anticipating revenues declining? Are you anticipating what are the biggest challenges that you're facing? Is it supply chain? Is it retaining employees? Is it finding employees? The Canadian Business Survey allows you to look at that by a province and by 20 cities, the 20 largest cities in Canada, not all cities in Canada, but for the 20 largest cities, we have additional data available. And the really interesting thing about this data set is that it provides, you can look by industry. So the NAICS codes that I introduced you, you can look and see, which industries are more optimistic than others. But it also provides information by urban and rural businesses. So, we sometimes forget because we're such an urbanized country that, there are businesses that are set up in rural areas. And so the Canadian Survey of Business provides you, and I'll show you an example shortly of, how businesses in rural as opposed to urban areas are faring and what their expectations are and things of that nature. But it's a really interesting data set to put some context to the data. The other interesting thing about it is it provides detailed information or provides additional information, not just by NAICS, but provides information for importers and exporters. So those two are identified separately in the data. You can look to see how they're faring and perceiving the challenges that businesses are facing. And it also provides information on businesses owned by women, businesses owned by Indigenous persons, businesses owned by visible minorities. So it allows us to get a much better sense of just how diverse the the majority of ownership of businesses in Canada are, and see how new businesses, so businesses that have just recently started, compared to established businesses. It's really interesting to look at. We have a question about, do you expect revenues to increase or decrease? And it's really interesting to compare the sort of the dynamic of those new companies as opposed to the well-established companies. Do you anticipate hiring, or do you anticipate reducing staff? All of those type of questions can be answered from the Canadian Survey on Business Condition. And then if you wanted to look at some data on business innovations, like new payment methods, use of AI, we have the Survey on Innovation and Business Strategy, which is, again, providing some additional information that's more than just counts for the number of businesses, but some of the strategies that businesses are using. So I just wanted to show you, just go back to the Canadian Survey on Business Condition and just give you an indication. This is the, I believe this is the most recent release from the survey, and just an indication of the type of information that we collect. Majority of businesses expect to have obstacles in cost-related obstacles, inflation, insurance, things of that nature. Businesses having trouble with supply chain. When the COVID was started, this is one of the measures we saw quite often, is people saying, I'm having trouble getting access to products and things of that nature. And now, of course, rising inflation, rising costs of inputs. And again, you can look at how different industries are dealing with these sort of challenges from this data set. So a really interesting data set that I want people to be familiar with and to use it to your advantage. When the data gets released in our daily, which is our Statistics Canada's daily newsletter, there are usually somewhere around 25 data tables that are associated with this survey. So you can appreciate sort of the depth of analysis that you can do. And here's just another example from this in terms of, we often neglect to think about rural, but if we wanted to look at, the top four obstacles for rural and small town businesses over the next little while, what are they, and what might they be, and how might they differ from businesses in urban settings? Excuse me, sorry. So again, a data set that you may not necessarily be familiar with because it's relatively new, but a data set I definitely would want you to be familiar with. So I'll come back to some other Statistics Canada specific data, particularly when we talk about labor market information. If anyone's interested, we offer a Statistics Canada, we offer a session like this one specific to labor market information, where we introduce people to the labor force survey, the survey of employment and payroll hours, the job vacancy survey. But I'll come back to some of those because many businesses find it useful to have a sense of what's happening from an economic perspective. What's the unemployment rate? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? What's the unemployment rate for immigrants or newcomers to Canada as opposed to long-term Canadians or Canadian-born? And some of the data set allows us to look at that. We can even look at the labor force market characteristics of people with or without high school or with or without university degrees. So I'll come back to that. But before I get to that, I just wanted to sort of focus on a data set that's not necessarily housed on Statistics Canada's website, but it's derived from a great extent to data collected from or by Statistics Canada. And this is a financial performance data that's available from another federal government department. And it allows you, it basically gives you information that if you were to start thinking about developing a business plan, what are the type of expenses I might incur? and how large are they for the typical business that I'm in. So you could look at particular industry. You can you can look at different models. If I anticipate my revenue to be under a million, or if I anticipate my revenue to be 5 million, you can look at what are the typical expenses and the typical revenue that businesses in those similar industries are incurring. And again, I hope you appreciate it, could be an extremely useful springboard to get you at least started, to have some understanding of what the realities might be. So the financial performance data is a data set. I'll show you, I'll try if I have time, I'll show you specifically some examples of some of the things you can do. But it's data that's reported by NAICS code. So you can type in a particular NAICS and get basically the financial sheet of costs, expenditures, revenues. And the interesting thing about this data set is it provides it by different income or employment, or not employment, by revenue quintiles. So if a smaller business as opposed to a larger business, you can get a sense of what those expenses might be. Yes, David, you have a question, please.
Yeah, just a quick time check. We're at 11:40, so we have about 20 minutes left. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Thank you very much. So I will quickly go over, and as I said, I'd love to show you some of the data sets. So let me just come back to some of the data sources I was referring to earlier. Labor market information, so we can look at, there's a tool on Statistics Canada's website called the Canadian Economic Tracker, and you can look to see what's happening with respect to employment rates by particular industries and by particular businesses and things of that nature. So that's going to be really useful. But it also provides some additional information with respect to, gross domestic product by industry, impact of producer prices, and things of that nature. So another really good data source that you may or may not be familiar with. I believe my colleague Laszlo can jump or remind me, but I believe this is a relatively new tool we've recently added to our website. So again, we want people to be familiar with them. And a couple of other tools that just, allow you to sort of get a glimpse of some of the important labor market information without having to delve into great detail. If you wanted to look at unemployment rates by particular communities, or if you want to look at job vacancies. So the job vacancy and wage survey is not a survey I'll go into in great detail, but it's a survey that is conducted quarterly or released quarterly. And it basically gives us an indication of how many jobs are available that aren't going filled. So employers are not able to fill these jobs, and we're able to identify by NAICS. And so you can get a sense of, for healthcare workers, what the job vacancy rate is compared to construction workers. And so this is a really helpful tool that we want people to be familiar with. It's called the Job Vacancy and Wage Survey. And again, people oftentimes when we do these sessions, people are familiar with the labor force survey. It gets reported monthly. It gets national news every time it gets reported. But the labor market information is not just one data source. There's multiple data sources that comprise labor market information. And the job vacancy and wage survey is one of them. And so it's a really helpful that people are familiar with those data sets. Okay, so that was what I wanted to try and cover during the lecture portion. I will stop sharing my screen here. Again, if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to infostats@statscan.ca. Like I said, I'm based in Winnipeg, but if you're in Alberta or wherever you might be, we have consulting analysts like myself who are more than happy to work with you and answer your questions, and maybe even direct you to particular data sets that might be useful, custom data sources and things of that nature. So you can use the infostats and they will direct it to the appropriate consulting analyst in your appropriate area. So feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. If there's anything else. So that's really it for the lecture portion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen or sharing my slides. Any questions before I go to the website navigation? Is there anything in the chat? I can't see the chat, so I don't know if there's questions.
It's clear.
Yeah, no
Nothing in the chat?
questions right now. So yeah, the demo would be great.
Okay, so let me see if I can. Now's the challenge with this. Can the StatsCan guy do technology? Let me see if I can share my share the StatsCan website. Hold on, just give me 1 second here. Are you all seeing the StatsCan website?
Yes, we are.
Yes. No?
Yep.
Oh, holy smokes!
Yep.
Wonders never cease, and I can make it a little bit bigger if people want, if that's okay. But so I'll very quickly introduce you to the Statistics Canada website. Of course, I encourage all of you to visit the site regularly. This is your data. You might as well use it to your extent. And go to www.can.gcda.ca to go to it. But the reason I like to spend some time on this is because it's sometimes a little bit convoluted to find your way around the data set. So how I like to introduce people to it is, you can scroll across. So we've got some basic information about Statistics Canada. We've got our daily, which is our daily newsletter. So it's here, and you can also subscribe to the daily by going to My StatCan, and you'll get. We have some basic key indicators. So if you just want to look up a quick statistic, and then we've also got some additional information about the work we do and the type of data. But the one thing that is interesting to me is that all these different sort of tabs and services and information that are on the web page can also be accessed by the top of the page along these, well, I call them tabs. I don't know if they're tabs. Along these sort of 8 tabs along the top. And so we have subject, we have data, we have analysis. So analysis would be any reports that Statistics Canada produces and adds analysis to, and people can go and see that. We have reference material. So if anyone wanted to look up the user guide for a data survey or the census dictionary, so if you're not clear on the terminology, reference material, it's not the most exciting reading in the world, but it's really useful to make sure that you're understanding the terminology correctly. We have geography, well, the type of levels of geography which the information is released. We have the census. So I talked this morning, or the beginning of the session, about the census is probably one of the most, if not the most important activities Statistics Canada does. The census is so important, it gets its own bar at the top of our page. And I'll quickly walk you through where you might find some of the information. And then we've got information for people who are survey participants about StatsCan, and then Canada, just to take you to other federal government departments. And if I have time, I'll use that link to take us to Innovation and Science and show you the financial performance information.
Sorry to interrupt, Darren.
Yeah,
David,
please.
I've just noticed in the chat, some people aren't able to see the chat.
They can see the screen, but they can't see the chat?
Correct. So all the links and some of the answers aren't going to be evident to everybody.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that just might be a technical issue for some of those folks. They just have to click on kind of the right functions and buttons on the right-hand side of their screen.
Yeah, hopefully you'll be able to see it, but I can't help you there. I am not a technical person. I'm a data person. So I'll just very quickly go over these. As I said, the census, if you wanted to look at the census, it's on the top bar. So you click on census of population. There are different, and it takes us to what's called the census homepage. And you could look at sort of a similar idea, but different tabs that are specific to census data. So if I wanted to look up census data, census analysis, census reference, census topics, census geography, much like on our homepage. And if I go to census data, so let's say I wanted specifically to look at data for Calgary or a particular area within Calgary, I can use the census to go to census profiles. And you can click on the census data, and you'll see a list of the most common data products that are available. So we have census profiles, which are basically a profile that lists age structure, family type, income, education levels, ethnicity, languages spoken, all of those sort of particular aspects. We have data tables. So data tables where you can actually look at more detailed information, like cross-tabulation, as we call them. Where if I wanted to look at educational attainment level by unemployment rate and industry. So how many 35-year-old females have a master's degree and are working in a particular industry? You could look at data tables. The census profiles basically just give you the basic counts. How many people are in this industry? How many people are 15 to 19 years of age and over? The data tables allow you to look at that data point cross-tabulated with something else. How many 15 to 19-year-olds have completed high school and are working? And in what industry are they working in? So those are sort of the examples of what you can do with the different data types. And special interest profiles, we have an Indigenous profile. So if you're particularly interested in looking at the characteristics of the Indigenous population, you can use the Indigenous profile. And so just because of the time, and I want to make sure I cover some of the other sources, I won't go into too much detail, but I hope that we've given you an indication of how you would go about finding and at least starting your search for census data. Okay, so if everyone's okay with that, and again, just for the sake of clarity, because sometimes people say, wait, how'd you get there from there? I always like to use the home button and just bring you back to where we started from. So I'm going to click on the home button and take us back to the home page. So very quickly, the time we have left, when we go to subjects, and I'll draw your attention to the subject bar. And here, you'll be able to look at the sort of the broad themes of the different subjects that are available. So again, if I wanted to look at retail and wholesale trade, I can click on retail and wholesale trade, and it will take me to what we call a hub or the homepage of the different retail and wholesale data sets that are available. And you can look at retail sales by type of store. So again, if you're thinking about developing a convenience store or a retail store, you can look at data in terms of retail sales. If you wanted to look at international trade, you can look at things of that nature. That's in a separate data set. You look at wholesale trade. So I'm just going to click on home. Again, bring us back to where we started. Click on subject. And if I wanted to look at international trade, it's right here. It's a separate tab. And this is where you would go to the Canadian International Merchandise Trade. But again, if you want to get a sense of who our trading partners are, then this will give you a good introduction to some of that data. I'm going to also, before I want to make sure I show you the financial performance, but I also want to sort of introduce you to one of the ways that might be really useful to find information on the Statistics Canada's website. And that comes back to the notion of the daily, our daily newsletter. We're not the most original coming up with names. The daily comes out daily, so we called it the daily. Our newsletter is the daily. And the one interesting thing I'll draw your attention to is you can look for releases by subject. So if I wanted to look at releases by business or business information, Canadian Survey of Business Conditions, I can also get a sense of what's going to be released by looking at the release schedule. And so if I click on by subject, we can look to see business performance and ownership, business consumer and services. So if I click on business performance and ownership, it'll give you an indication of all the different releases that have come out recently. And you'll get a sense of Canadian business counts. I talked about the Canadian business counts. I'll just give you a quick glimpse of what type of data is released from the Canadian business counts, so you'll have a better sense of what I was referring to. So I clicked on that, takes me to the release, and you'll see basic information about what was released, basic information about the data set, and then we've got text, tables, related information, previous release, so if you want to see the previous. But if I go to tables, and I'm showing you this one purposely because there's usually only 3 tables. Here's where we can look at Canadian business counts of businesses with employees, Canadian business counts of businesses without employees, and Canadian business counts by city. So if I just click on this data table, it will give us an indication of by particular city and by particular NAICS code. And so if any of you are not familiar, and I know I don't have much time, but if any of you are not familiar with Statistics Canada's website and our data tables, if you open this and you think, well, that's interesting. Okay, there's, 4,908 businesses in Lethbridge. But how do I get more information? If you go to the Add Remove tab, you click on Add Remove, you'll see some additional tabs that open up. And you can narrow your search. So let's say I was only interested in Lethbridge. I might take all of those off and look at, let's do Calgary. I'll do Lethbridge and Calgary. And we can even look at areas within Calgary. So if I was interested in Ardrey, for example, I can click on Ardrey or Airdrie, how you pronounce it. And if I wanted to know businesses by employment size, I can click on employment size. And anytime you see a variable or characteristic with a plus sign in front of it, means if you click it, you'll be able to get more detailed options that you can select. So if I want to know how many small employees there are in Calgary, 1 to 4 or 500 more, I can select that or select all of them. And then I could select by the industry code. And if I wanted to look at all the different industries, again, plus sign means I can click. And you can get an indication of how many people in Calgary work in construction, how many people work in retail, or wholesale, how many people work in retail. And the one last thing I'll say, and because we don't have much time, is you'll notice that the list starts with very broad classifications, but if you go down, and I'll just go up a little trick to show you, I'm going to ask it to show the first 200. Just click OK. And now you'll see the much more detailed list of all the different NAICS codes by the detailed NAICS classification. So, David, are we running out of time or do we have any more time?
We're running short on time, but I will pose maybe one very quick last question.
Sure, please.
Is Stats Canada incorporating AI into any of the work that you do?
Ooh, that's a good question. We are. I was just in Ottawa and we just had a presentation. We're careful. We're using it carefully, but we are trying to use it for different sources to simplify data searches, to simplify things like remote sensing and crop conditions. So we are, but we're very cautious about, and we're making sure that everything is reviewed by a human, because there's nothing better than humans.
Yeah.
So,
awesome.
but we are definitely trying to capitalize on AI and artificial intelligence. Now, I know we're out of time, but the last thing I was going to say is I didn't get a chance to show it to you, but I would encourage you to, and if you want to explore the link, the financial performance information is, again, a really gold mine in terms of getting an indication of business revenues and expenditures. Okay, so for those who are trying to develop a business plan, it's a really useful data source. I will stop sharing because I know we're out of time, but I hope that was helpful.
No, I think that was great, Darren. Thanks for that kind of overview of everything you can offer. Lots of good information and data. And as we know, right, businesses need to be very competitive now more than ever. So having access to a lot of this data will help make much more informed business decisions, right? So you can kind of, look at growing your business or maybe getting started in new industries and sectors that are cropping up. You never really know. So really great data. The session is recorded and will be available on our YouTube page. So if you did miss anything, definitely check that out in the next day or two. We'll have that posted. And we'll also send an email in the next day or two with a link to the recording. So thank you so much for your valuable
Thank you for the invitation.
Darren.
I appreciate it.
So we had Darren and Laszlo. Thank you so much for sharing some of those great resources in the chat. And as we're closing here, just a quick note. If folks are interested, feel free to sign up for our newsletter. You can do that by scanning the QR code here. And yeah, hopefully check out our website. Tons of great information there, upcoming webinars and different resources. Connect to a business strategist as well, who can work with you one-on-one with your business needs. And yeah, no, this was a really informative session. So again, thank you so much for coming and giving kind of that overview of what we can do through Stats Canada.
Thank you again. Take care, all.
Perfect. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much.